This review has been made possible by Toyota of Naperville. As you know, Toyota has tons of brand new Toyotas available for purchase, but did you know that they also have a remarkable selection of used cars? Head on over to toyotaofnaperville.com and look through hundreds of used cars for sale right now. Alright, what's up guys? My name is Zach and today I am driving a 2013 Buick Regal GS. Up front is a 2.0 liter turbocharged inline 4. Down below is a 6-speed manual transmission. This video is sponsored by CarMarshal.com. If you'd like to support the channel, click the link down in the description below. CarMarshal.com advertises for over 100,000 vehicles across the US. So let's get back to that 2.0 liter turbocharged inline 4. Well, it is an Ecotec, which is a family of engines from GM. They've put it in everything. The Equinoxes have used Ecotecs. They range from 2 liters to 2.4 liters. My own personal Pontiac G6 has a 2.4 liter Ecotec. It's just a family of engines. And this engine specifically, the 2 liter, actually shares a lot of similarities with the older Cobalt SS's, if you guys remember those from back in the day. We do have a GS button and a Sport button, which we cannot toggle together. So I would assume GS is better because it looks more like a racing flag. So GS, traction control off, first gear, 2 liter turbo. It's definitely peppy, as you guys heard, a little bit of wheel spin, definitely gets into boost. But even with traction control off, it really feels like it sort of killed my revs. But you do get boost noises. You actually get good boost sounds, man. But that's not why we're here. The engine is not why we're here, although it's good. We're here because it's a 6-speed manual. A Buick that is a manual. I never thought I would see the day where I drove a manual Buick. Now, back in the day, they had manuals, of course, and a lot of people were like, oh, what about the Grand Nationals? A lot of people forget that the Grand Nationals, the actual top trim, were automatics. And so to drive not only a manual Buick, but a modern, it's really only 6 years old, a 6-year-old Buick with a manual, it's pretty special. That being said, I don't really like it. I don't really like the manual. The clutch is super light to depress. There's almost no feeling. But then on the return, it's almost stiffer on the return, which is sort of weird. It definitely feels kind of weird. When you're letting it out, it's not very linear. It almost feels like it gets stuck at certain points and not at others. That being said, the throw is fine. It's a little bit too light. I wish it was a little bit manlier. Wish it had more grunt. Wish it was more satisfying, but it's not. And then reverse is sort of weird. There's this little trigger on the back of the shift knob. You pull that up and then you go all the way left and forward where you would think first gear would be, and that is your reverse gear. I think it's super unique. I think it's super special, and I think it's awesome that they offered the Regal with a manual transmission. I mean, driving a manual Buick, it's awesome, but I just feel like the execution wasn't quite there. Last but not least, the Buick Regal is front-wheel drive. There was an all-wheel drive concept, and they kept everything from the concept except all-wheel drive. So, unfortunately, the actual production model does have front-wheel drive as opposed to all. Sucks, but what can you do? So let's talk about the interior. Well, in front of me, I have a bunch of different gauges. On the left is my tachometer. In the center, I have coolant temperature and fuel, and on the right is my speedometer. In the center, I do get a little screen just giving me basic information like my miles per hour in digits, my distance till empty, my average MPG, and my odometer, as well as my compass, and actually it tells me when to shift up, which is interesting. On the steering wheel, I have cruise control on the left. Now, an interesting thing about this is when you actually engage cruise control, the button just stays there. It flips in, and then when you disengage it, it flips back out. Feels a little bit clunky, but it is what it is. And on the right, I have voice controls and my radio volume, stuff like that. To the left, I just have my headlight and dimmer switch options. And then on the door, I have my window switches. Again, nothing crazy. Now let's get into the infotainment. It is touchscreen and it has a bunch of interesting options. I was messing around with it earlier and I found that there's actually a section for a 5-day forecast as well as movie times, which is really, really interesting. Why a car would it put movie times in the infotainment system? And not only that, it doesn't work anymore. I keep clicking 5-day forecast. It will not tell me. I don't know if that was a subscription, like you had to subscribe from Buick, and obviously since this is a used car and for sale at a different dealer, they pulled that subscription. I don't know what it is, but you can't get that anymore, which is only 6 years ago. But that being said, it is a very late 2000s sort of infotainment center, and I can't really bash it because this is a 2013. It's right in the era. It's just, by modern standards, it is a little bit old looking. That being said, it's very clear, easy to read, a little bit wonky to use if you do end up using the dial. There is a dial down below we'll talk about in a second. If you do end up using that, it's a little bit clunky. But then we get down to the hazard button and the lock and unlock, stuff like that. And then we have a couple interesting buttons up top. We have the GS button and the sport button, as well as traction control off. So we can actually trigger a couple interesting sporty type buttons. Then down below those buttons, we just have our navigation, skip, repeat, destination. It's a little bit cluttered. A lot of this stuff does different things. These aren't just audio options. These aren't just navigation options. These aren't just phone options. They're sort of all tossed in together with one another. And I don't like how cluttered it is, but then again, it's not the worst thing in the world. Then we have our climate control options. This is really concise. This is all in one area. I do have heated seats, which is a nice option, stuff like that. Then I have a little cubby hole, which does have a 12-volt charger in it, as well as an ashtray. And then we come to the shifter. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm not a huge fan of the feeling of the shifter, but I think the look of it is spot on. I think the shifter looks great. I think it looks very flush with the center console. And it looks modern, it looks good, and it doesn't look out of place, which is surprising because it's in a Buick. Then down at the very bottom, we have our electronic parking brake, which we actually need here in the manual. And we have our sort of navigation dial for the center screen. So like I said earlier, this is kind of clunky to use just because you can't go forward and back or up and down. So if you want to get to something at the bottom of the screen, you just have to keep scrolling right until you get there. But I do have buttons for audio, mute, destination, navigation, and back. Then I have two cup holders and a center console. Now the seats are leather, they are nice, they are plush, they are power as well, and I really like that. They're not really sporty seats, which I'll get to it later. This car, I'm not quite sure what it wants to be, and the seats are not solving any mysteries for me. But speaking of seats, let's do a backseat review. All right, so we're in the back of the 2013 Buick Regal GS in manual, and back seats aren't bad. They're decently comfortable. They're a little bit stiff, but it's not the end of the world. I do really, really like, I have an AC 120 volt, max 150 watt wall outlet. I can plug whatever the heck I want into that rear outlet. I really, really like that. But I do have a center console, little cubby hole for storage in there. Nothing really too crazy. It flips up. I do have 3 seat belts back here. It is not a 2+2. It is a full rear seat. But overall, it's not really that interesting of a back seat. I could see myself, if I were a little bit taller, hitting the roof. I am 5'11", so, you know, 6 foot, 6'1", 6'2", you're gonna start pushing it back here for sure. But other than that, it's not a bad back seat. Overall, I like the interior. It's very much GM. I mean, the center display and the gauges, same thing you'll find on a Malibu of the same era. It's a lot of parts bin stuff. GM does this, that's nothing new. I think it all works decently well together. I don't like the fact that all of the buttons are cluttered in the middle. It's a lot of buttons. But I do like how over by the passenger, it does say GS, because this is the Regal GS. And I really like the fact that they actually still put that on the dash. It makes me feel better. You know, it makes me feel good about this, that this isn't a base model Regal. This is something special, and it sort of reminds me of that. Now, getting to the looks. The looks are a very good representation of this car because it's sort of sporty, but sort of not. I like the color. I like the front end. I think the front end looks good. The back end doesn't really do much for me. It's fine. The wheels are fine. Front end's fine. It's a fine looking car. It's a decent looking car. You know, it's not the worst thing in the world. It's not the best thing in the world. And so that brings me to my point about the Buick, about the Regal, about the Buick Regal GS, the 2013 Regal GS with a 2-liter turbo, 6-speed manual. This car does not know what it wants to be. Is it a small sports sedan that's supposed to, compete with maybe BMW M's? Absolutely not. Does it compete with Audi S4s, S3s? No. But is it luxurious? Does it pamper you? It just happens to be fast. And really not. It's not that luxurious. It's not that nice in here. It's nice for sure. It's nicer than your average car, 100%. It's not base model at all. But it's not a super luxury car. I just feel like Buick as a whole, they don't go all in on anything. They just sort of monotone it. And I know that's not a word. You can't monotone something. That's not a verb. But that's really how I feel. Is they sort of averaged everything out. The performance for a more expensive car is pretty average. The luxury in here is pretty average. The looks are pretty average. And altogether, it makes it a decent car, but it doesn't wow me in any sort of way. The turbo, it's great, but there's other cars with great turbos. The looks are good, but there's other cars that look better. It's comfortable, but other cars are more comfortable. It doesn't commit to anything. It's like that friend that doesn't have any passion in their life. And so yes, they might be your best friend. You love them to death. They're great, but at the end of the day, they don't get excited by anything. They're not interested in anything. They don't have drive. And so as time goes on, you sort of drift away. And that's how I feel about this thing. It doesn't commit. It's not all in. It's not redline speed or plush comfort. It's just redline comfort. And honestly, I wish that Buick went all in with the aggressive side. I wish they gave this higher bolsters. I wish they gave it a V6 turbo. The manual's fine. The manual's great. The manual can stay. I wish that they made it all-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive. I wish Buick really made something to stick it to the other guys. GM has the ATS platform, a Cadillac ATS or Cadillac CTS-V. Make a slightly less expensive CTS-V. I really expected this to be that. I expected this to be sort of a budget performance car. And yes, it gets up and goes, but my socks are still very well on my feet. And so the last thing I want to talk about with the Regal GS actually has absolutely nothing to do with America. It actually has everything to do with China. Now, if any of my viewers are from China or have been to China, please leave a comment what you think on this issue or topic. Buick, it's all right here. It's sort of a grandpa sort of market here that buy Buicks. And I say that with all the love in the world. My grandparents had 2 back-to-back Buick LaCrosses. It's actually one of the cars I learned how to drive on with my permit. But in China, Buicks sell 3 times more cars than they do here. So for every Buick sold here, they sell 3 in China. And they're marketed towards 30-year-olds in China. They're kind of hip, cool, nice cars. And so it makes me wonder how this specific car came about. Did they just have manual transmissions from China just sitting around and they shipped a couple over here? Is there a bigger want for manual 2-liter turbo Regals in China and they just happen to ship them here? I don't know, but I would love to read more. If anyone has any more information on why Buick is so big in China, please let me know. I think it's super interesting. I'd love to travel to China one day and drive a Buick there because they are a little bit different than they are here. But that's totally getting off topic. I like this car. When I tell people how was it, I would say it's good, but I don't think I'd have a whole conversation about it. They'd be like, oh, a Buick manual. I'd be like, yeah, it's a modern Buick manual. It's kind of quirky. But that's really where the conversation would die. I'm not wowed. I'm not impressed. This isn't uber luxury. This isn't uber speed. This isn't uber styling. And I just wish Buick tried a little bit harder with this. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Huge thank you to Toyota of Naperville for letting me take out their manual Regal GS. This car is for sale. I'll leave a link in the description below if you'd like to buy this exact Buick Regal. But like I said, huge thank you to Toyota of Naperville. Their information is up on the screen and a link to the car is in the description down below. But hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to rate the video, comment on the video, and subscribe if you really liked it. Take care, guys. There goes a sight from my soul.
right there.